Welcome, everybody, to Confessions of a CRA. We have another great episode here today. This time joining me all the way from, just west of London is Michael Summers. And Michael has operated in clinical research for over 22 years, joining as a clinical study nurse and then becoming a CRA, and then been offered the opportunity to tackle the clinical project manager role. And he's had the fortune to manage an excellent group of people in clinical processes and resourcing groups, and benefiting from the thoughts and successes of his team, realizing that we're never too old to learn. So today he works independently as a freelancer, focusing now on clinical study oversight, engagement activities, and recruitment-related elements. But he still has a strong desire to challenge the status quo of seek innovation out and champion it. So welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for the invite. Pleasure to join you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and dive right in and share with us how you got involved in clinical research, and what was your first industry role?
Yeah, sure. So when I left school, I sort of set up independently, doing something completely not related to clinical research or nursing or anything of that nature. I had my own business immediately after school, but unfortunately, with being an entrepreneur, it doesn't always work out how you think it's going to. So I ended up taking a role as a auxiliary nurse, so helping out on wards, supporting the qualified nurses, etc. And I didn't appreciate at that time where that was going to lead me. So my mother's a nurse, so I sort of used a personal network to get myself a role as an auxiliary nurse. I stayed in that, working with people with learning difficulties for about 2-3 years, and realised I did enjoy nursing. I wanted to stay in it. So I put in an application to become a qualified nurse, and I went off to a city in the Midlands called Nottingham, where I did nursing training for about 3.5 years. And I stayed in nursing, and again, I was more freelance than permanent. I was flipping between different wards, different experiences. I hadn't really at that stage, other than a few friends at nursing college who were doing some clinical research that actually as participants. You know what it's like when you get to university towns. They have these units where if you're a little bit broke as a student, and you're like, you know what, I'll apply and do this research. So that was my first exposure to the fact that there was this industry out there looking at drugs, trying to explore how to develop them. Anyway, I stayed in nursing till probably about 1999, and I was at a junction in my career. I was about to become a charge nurse on a ward, and I couldn't decide whether that pathway was where I wanted to go. In the UK, what you earn as a nurse, and if you're the sort of the primary wage earner, it's not huge amounts of money. So I started thinking carefully about where am I going, what am I doing over the course of my career. And luckily for me, a friend of mine, Amanda, had just taken on this role as a study nurse in a very small GP's clinic, who was taking on studies from industry, searching through their database of patients, and working with other referral sites locally to identify patients. So I joined that group in July of 1999, and really quickly realised, this is a great role, but what the CRAs are doing, their interactions with us, how they work, and the scope of what they were looking at the time. So back in 99, I think when you joined the CRA world, you were the jack of all trades. I mean, I think over the years that role has become more and more refined down to the simple monitoring, and to some extent even the startup of sites has disappeared because we have those specialist roles now. But back in '99, you got an exposure to a huge array of clinical research roles, experience. Anyway, so in September of that year, I decided I'd apply for a job that I'd seen in Scientist, and it was for a small CRO that was oncology focused, and they worked in the south of England, and they wanted someone who could speak German. Now, I was quite honest with them. I do speak German, but I wouldn't say I was fluent in German. I had an interview with them, met with two ladies in the office there, and we had a conversation, and I had to try and speak German to them. I came out of that meeting and I thought, there's no way I've got this role. My German wasn't up to the mark. I mean, they came back to me a couple of days later and said, look, you're right, your German isn't fluent, but we think you've got the sort of the characteristics that we want to have in someone who works as a CRA. So that January of 2000, well, January of '99. So it was '98 I left. January of '99, I got this role with Theradex, as the company I was working with, and my job was working across Europe. So there were some German sites, but I was also working in Holland and other areas of Europe, and not a lot of UK sites. So that was my first entry into the CRA world, and unfortunately, that product there were some manufacturing aspects that caused that product to be delayed. So I spent most of that year not really monitoring very heavily, but learning about what you do in monitoring, and occasionally one or two visits on other studies. And it got to that end of that year, and I hadn't really had much exposure to monitoring or any of the aspects working at the site. There'd been a significant amount of in-house work, site preparation, some of the other aspects related to regulatory, etc. And I thought at that point I need to find an alternative that exposes me more to monitoring. So I moved to a bigger CRO in January of 2000, and really focused on monitoring for that, well, the next 18 months. So I was going across a lot of the UK sites, a lot of hypertension and heart-related and asthma-related clinical research. And it was really that opportunity that allowed me to see what the role entailed, get more exposure, and really learn about what it was to be a CRA. Any questions, or do you want me to carry on, Jasmine?
No questions so far. I'm just, enjoying your story.
Okay, great. So I left that company. I saw a very small company, and I think for me, I quite enjoy the smaller companies where you're more involved with the senior members. You have a voice. You have the ability to, champion some of the process changes, etc. Anyway, I went to another small Eastern European CRO, and that experience, I got there. When did I get there? Probably in 2001, 2002. And I started working with them, doing CRA work, also starting to get exposed to what it was to be a project manager. And back in those early days, the ability to go from being entry level to getting aspects of project management, it was quite easy, and it was very rapid experience and change. So I think I got married in 2003, and my boss pulled me into the office about 2 days before I was disappearing for a 3-week holiday. I know you Americans, 3 weeks holiday seems like a lifetime, but hey ho. He called me in and he said, right, you're getting married next week. I want to give you a wedding present. So he basically said, I'm making you a project manager. So when you get back from your holidays, you're going to be working in project management role, which was a great thing from him. And, well, obviously a big boost for my confidence. He was a great mentor at that time as well. So that really got me working into project management. And I stayed with that company for about 5 years, and then decided again to go back to a big CRO, thinking there's going to be more exposure, there's going to be more opportunities to do different things. And I think realistically, I did about 18 months with that bigger CRO. I don't think it was good experience, but I don't think bigger CROs, bigger farmers, they're not really where I like to fit. So I decided at that point, freelancing was an opportunity. So I set up a company. I got myself a contract working with with the same CRO, but doing feasibility, and started working with them, and then started doing maternity leave cover or taking on roles with other biotechs and pharma. I did that for about, probably about 5 years. And I ended up, for the last 3 years of that, I worked for one particular company. And my manager there, the director, she kept whispering in my ear, "Come on, Mike, become permanent. We want you on the leadership team." And I was persistently saying, "No, I'm not interested. I'm happy with what I'm doing." And the specific company that I was working at in 2013, they had a massive reorg and they had a vision that was quite appealing. So I finally succumbed to this whispering in my ear from my director, and I joined that leadership team within the clinical operations. So I had probably about 12 months working in that startup role, and it was senior manager role in clinical operations. I started to get involved in there was a partnership relationship we had with a large CRO, so I was involved to some extent in that. I also managed the FSP model for our group, bringing in clinical trial assistants and clinical trial coordinators. So that was under my remit. And in addition, started to build up a knowledge of process, how we change process, what was desirable for our small group of clinical operations members. And I started to build a role for myself in that group, specifically looking at process-related items. And that developed over the course of a year or so, until they decided that role didn't fit in clinical operations. They wanted it more central for the whole of clinical operations, so program management and study management. So I got moved into the primary clinical operations group, and that's where I took on a small team. So this great team I had in the US, working on data analytics and clinical operation process. So I stayed with that, and I kept doing that. And by this time, my previous director, who'd been whispering in my ear for so many years, he disappeared off and decided to go freelance. And I can remember it was about September 2017. I get this phone call from her. Oh, Mike, I'm looking at this role at this small biotech. I said, okay, what's the role? So she starts explaining it to me, and it piqued my interest. Anyway, so I ended up working with her behind the scenes, starting to build out what this role was for this small biotech company. And then it became obvious, actually, this is a role I would like to do. So rather ironically, after her whispering and whispering to get me to become an employee, she was whispering in my ear now to become a freelancer again. So 2018, I finished up with a big biotech I was with, and 2019 I joined this this small biotech working as a freelancer for them in Europe, and that's what I've been doing for probably since 2019 till now. And at the moment, I'm so we've met because I've been increasing my network. At the moment, so as you said, I'm doing oversight and such, but I'm also looking at building a freelancer community. Start off with it's a recruitment portal that clients can go into, and freelancers can be on there and showcase their talents. But longer term, I really want it to be a community for us freelancers, so we can share knowledge. I don't know about you, but I don't get the opportunity to mentor anyone or be mentored. If we could build something like that in a freelancer community, that's certainly something I think would be beneficial to all of us. So that's where I've got to date. That's where I'm working on at the moment.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's an incredible story. So I have, several several questions from what you said. Well, first of all, would you say that it sounds like, I wouldn't say that you maybe struggled as much as I did to land your first role, but that doesn't mean that you didn't struggle, right? So what would you say would be your biggest challenge to breaking into that first CRA role?
I think back then it was a little bit easier. I think nowadays there's a lot more knowledge in people who understand what clinical research is and what the roles are that you can get as an entry level.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays, so I went straight in as a CRA. I think it's highly unlikely, probably impossible for someone to go from college or outside industry direct into a CRA role now. So I think for individuals who are joining the industry now, it's about recognizing what the routes of access are. So be that a CTA or a sort of clinical trial associate or a clinical trial coordinator, really researching what does that entail and how can I access that? Who can I speak to in order to get that first entry level? And I think as well, having managed a clinical trial FSP group of that nature, I think that there seems a little bit to be a feeling, right, I've done a year, so I should get a promotion up to the next level. And I think you just need to be, and I was like this back in the early days, I'm going to be the CEO of this company by such and such a date. Well, it's not realistic. So you just need to be aware that you're going to have to do time in role and make as much from that as you can. Look for the opportunities to expose yourself for different skill sets. So the more you can build that up and you can have open conversations with people in industry and say, make suggestions. Don't be scared because you're the entry level person joining a company. Don't be scared to put your hand up and say, look, I've seen this. There are better opportunities for us to do this. I think that's the key. People very quickly recognise when they've got good talent, and opportunities come to you if you're that go and do it, and that positive. I know a way of doing this quickly for you. So I think that's a key aspect nowadays, and there's a lot of competition.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And would you say that being a nurse helped you get into that first CRA role? Would you say that not only helped get the role, but do you feel like it prepared you to be a better CRA?
So I think in some aspects, yes. I don't know that it. Well, obviously it did help me, because if I hadn't been a nurse, that opportunity that my old friend introduced me to, I wouldn't have been able to take that on. I think as well, because you're ingrained as a clinical trial nurse, you're ingrained in there, searching through databases, trying to understand, how do I take these requirements that exist within a protocol and look at the database of information I have over here to determine who might be suitable. It gives you that sort of that lens to look at information and data and be able to pick out relevant points. So I think it helps from that perspective. But then again, there'll be a lot of people who come in from a biochemistry background, etc. There are gaps in my knowledge that they will be able to understand aspects of that protocol that I perhaps will be a stretch for me, the mechanisms of action, etc.
Right.
And I think what you have to recognise is, as an individual, you can't possibly be the expert on every single aspect. You need to understand where you are the expert and how that can be utilised by your team, but also who in your team has that knowledge that perhaps you have not a failing, but it's not as finely tuned as they have, and be able to draw on them. And I think that's critical. We have these teams for a reason. Tap into them, and if you get the opportunity, within some companies you get the opportunity. You're in ClinOps, but okay, why don't you go and have a role in regulatory for 6 months? If you get that opportunity, take it, because it will give you a different perspective on how our industry works and what needs to be done. And it may also offer you up a career change, because you might decide, actually, that's where I want to be. I don't want to be in ClinOps. I want to be in regulatory or pharmacovigilance or
Right.
data management.
Right. I agree. And so it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you had an amazing career where you progressed throughout, to management and other opportunities. So what would you say would be the key tip or advice, or like the main, 1 or 2 points that helped you go from the CRA to management? It seems like in a fairly quick amount of time.
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things is that exposure. So if you're sitting there and you're working and all you're doing is, right, I know A to Z finishes it, my job. If that's what you're doing, yeah, okay, your management might think, great, he does the job, he gets it done effectively, but what else can he do? You need to show that interest in being exposed to the other aspects of the clinical research field. And as I said earlier, I think you have to be vocal as well. I know I said do your time, learn your trade, but I think you also need to be open to having the conversations that some of us find hard with your manager. Look, I really want to be here, so what do I need to do with you to get exposure to the things that enable me to get there? You can be that candid and transparent, and actually your managers will be much more welcoming to someone who is able to have that conversation and explore how they get to the next step than someone who sits there and goes, okay, I've been in place a year, so I must have got the experience to get the next role. That's not how it works.
Yeah. I agree. And there's so many people that I run into who they take that approach that you just said that, you absolutely cannot do. They kind of just sit there and wait, and they think that time is the determining factor, but you do have to communicate and vocalize and let your manager know, hey, I'm interested in moving to a CRA role. I'm interested in moving into project management. So I absolutely agree. And so you mentioned, that now you're in the freelance space. Would that be, is that the exact same thing as like a 1099 contractor? Well, for the US anyways, it's 1099, but would that be the same kind of role?
I'm not sure. I don't know what 1099 is. I think it is the same. So basically, I operate my own limited company, and through that, I sell my services and my experience to other companies, and I subcontract work that I have to other freelancers. So I'm basically my own boss, and I come in as offering that expertise in relation to certain specific subjects. So if that's how it works was it 1099? If that's how it works for them, yeah, that's what it is in the UK.
Okay. So I guess some contractors probably do it that way. But most of them, they're still monitoring. Do you yourself do any monitoring or okay. Well, then I guess it probably is the similar, except I don't know how it works with subcontracting out to other monitors. I'm pretty sure it probably works in a similar way. I've just only had experience with doing it, monitoring myself, but I'm pretty sure that is an option. And that brings up a good point, because I never really thought about, subcontracting when you have all these opportunities coming to you with, you're only one person, right? But that's an excellent, idea. So would you say that you enjoy, working for the CRO, for the company, more so than being a freelancer? Or are there just pros and cons to both? And it kind of depends on what your particular goals are at that, given moment or time.
So yeah, so I much prefer being a freelancer.
Okay.
There are merits to being an employee, not least of which healthcare package, pension, all of these things. So to some extent, there's a security blanket that exists if you're an employee. And that security blanket is something you have to take control of if you decide to be a freelancer. I think as well, if you go into freelancing too early, it's like that career progression pathway. If you haven't really exposed yourself to the range of problems or experiences that you could come into contact with in that specific role, be it monitoring or project management or whatever other facet of clinical delivery or drug delivery. If you haven't got that experience, you run the risk that you won't be able to handle all the situations you might come up against. So I think when you work for a big CRO, well, if you work for any CRO or any biotech or pharma, you get opportunities, and you get opportunities to be exposed to a greater volume of risks, a better understanding of how you mitigate them. You get exposure to perhaps regulatory approvals, etc. So you build up a knowledge base. I think you need to do that time in industry before you go into freelancing. And, freelancing isn't for everyone. Some individuals, the thought of having to manage your own accounts, of setting up a company, of looking for work and being able to connect to people and say, look, you're looking for that sort of person. I'm that sort of person. I can do that for you. That doesn't naturally sit well with some people, and that's fine, but from personal experience, I like the freedom that freelancing gives me. I like the fact that I can interact with a range of different people in different companies. And, in all the years I've been doing it, there's only been one period when I moved back from Germany, where I'd been freelancing, back to the UK, where I had, it was July, August time. I don't know you must realise in July and August, most of Europe goes to sleep and has a siesta. So finding roles at that period in time is difficult. So I had a couple of months where I got to spend time on the golf course and not doing very much while I waited for a role to appear. But you factor that into your planning. It's another risk mitigation thing that you have to consider.
Wow. And just thinking about what you said about during the June, July time is so different. Where you are, it's like, I always forget, and I appreciate every time I speak with somebody outside the US that we don't get the same breaks. Like June, July is like peak season for us. And like when you mentioned the 3-week vacation, like you have to ask for extra approval. You have to get like that extra layer to even really almost get 2 weeks off. So I always I just admire you guys for that. It's just, wow. Wow.
We sit over here in Europe. I see colleagues of mine who in the US have maternity leave or whatever. Over in the UK you get 9 months of maternity leave, and I see you guys so rapidly going back to work, and it's an eye opener for us.
Yes, absolutely. They barely want to give you 6 weeks, barely. And some companies, they don't give you that. So yeah, that is wow. 9 months is like, if only we could, take a page out of your book and follow what's going on over there. But government, how that goes. So I did want to ask you one other thing before I ask you that, I want to compare the travel. So of course, the US, if you're a US monitor, or even I guess I would say like probably a Canadian monitor too, like of course the countries are a lot bigger. But for you, what does travel look like? What percentage would you say you're on the road, or how often, how many days a week would you say, on average, of course, that you're traveling?
Yeah, sure. So in the role I was doing before COVID, I was doing something called a clinical site liaison role, and that was across Europe, and I would have thought 2 to 3 weeks per month I would be traveling somewhere in Europe, and it would be, and it might be flying to Poland on Monday, have a meeting in Poland on Tuesday, fly to Spain on Wednesday, meeting in Spain on Thursday, and then back home. So it was quite intense and a lot of travel. I think for the CRAs that are working in the industry in Europe nowadays, I think I know they call the CROs in America road warriors. And I think to some extent it's the same for the CRAs in Europe nowadays. It's there's an expectation that you're going to be out 3 days a week. You're going to be managing your time scale to try and, tap into as many sites as possible. And then you've got these expectations about filing your reports, etc., etc., etc. So I think there's similarities in how CRA works in Europe. Obviously, for the European CRAs, if you're a Polish CRA, you're probably working predominantly in Poland, unless you've got other language skills. So it's that that maintains where you can operate the language skills because of the need to be able to look at those clinical records, the need to be able to interpret.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's the same travel requirements.
Wow. I didn't realize that. I thought it would be a little bit less. So that's very interesting. And would you say that COVID-19, the pandemic, has that impacted that in any way? I'm sure it has, but has that decreased the travel? Are they allowing monitors on site?
Yeah, so I can remember the first days of COVID and the conversations. So we were running some phase 2 studies, and very quickly it went from having access to these sites to shut. We're not allowing anyone on site who isn't an employee. I think as we've started to see the vaccination programs working, we started to see normality starting to flourish in Europe. We're starting to see access to sites opening up and the ability to return to some of those face-to-face meetings, etc. I have noticed with some of our sites, because of the impact of COVID, there's some of the trusts are determining, okay, how much are we going to invest in clinical studies? Which ones do we take on? So I think there's going to be a little bit more focus at the moment on which studies get the green light within certain institutions. So that's having an impact. But I think in general, we're moving back to that situation where you can visit the sites, you can interact with the physicians and with the study nurses, and you can do on-site, review of documents and equipment, etc. So it's returning to normal.
Okay.
Slowly.
Slowly. Wow. It's interesting to find out how it impacted everybody around the world, because, even within, at least in the US, between each state, the restrictions and the regulations are different. So to hear about it, how each country kind of handled it differently, it's always very, very interesting. Wow. And then I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like since the pandemic, there's been like this major increase in the US anyways, of trials opening up and jobs opening up. And I always attribute it to the fact that, COVID-19 kind of put clinical research on the map, because before, clinical trials were like this obscure, kind of ambiguous thing that people kind of knew was out there, but they didn't really put any focus on it. But after the pandemic, clinical trials and research kind of became like a focal point. So I don't know if people started putting more money into it or what happened, but it just seemed like things all of a sudden just kind of took off. And now it's like all these trials and all these positions that are opening up, and really there's not enough people to fill them. Is that something that you've experienced over in London as well? Yeah,
so certainly from what I've seen in terms of recruitment and freelancer searches, there's been a significant upturn in demand, and there's a shortage of the skilled individuals to fill the roles that have been requested. I don't know. I suspect a little bit the mergers and acquisitions has slowed a bit during the pandemic, and I wonder whether, as we return to normality within that, we see perhaps a few more mergers and acquisitions happen in the course of the next year or two.
Yeah,
maybe that has an impact on the working environment, but who knows? You know, it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen in our industry anyway. We shall see.
that's so true. So true. So what would you say? And I know we're starting to run out of time. I promise not to keep you long, but I wanted to at least ask you what would be that one piece of advice, or that, that main tip, or that one thing, or two or three things that you would say for someone who's looking to become a CRA, or someone who's even looking to advance their CRA career. What would you say to that individual?
Okay. So I think I'd say, and it probably echoes a lot of what I've said before, but I think do your research. So you need to be able to, when you're applying for any of these roles, you need to be able to clearly establish to that interviewer or to the recruitment consultant, well, less so to the recruitment consultant, but you need to be able to establish why you want to be in industry. You need to be able to clearly indicate an understanding of what's going to happen if you manage to land this role. And I think having that knowledge, which may not be experiential knowledge, it's more, considering all of the pathways that you could take to get into clinical research, and you've decided you're going to go down the CRA and the project management role, having that understanding of what that means first and foremost. And then if you are fortunate enough to get that first role, which is probably going to be, if you're going into ClinOps, it's probably going to be clinical trial assistant or clinical trial coordinator. It's personality. It's that I can do any of the things that you're putting in front of me. I can make interesting inputs or suggestions related to how we deliver this work. It's also about, exposing yourself as much as possible. So don't sit there shy and retiring. Really be forthright and say, I've done this, which you needed me to do. What else can I do to support? Where are there aspects where you're perhaps trying to do something that I could help you with it? It might not be my role, it might be your project management role, but if you delegate something to me that I can support you with, that's a learning opportunity for me, and it's a benefit for you because you're probably stretched as well. So I think those are the two key things. Know what it is you want and have a clear understanding of what that entails and what the pathways are. And then when you're in, really make sure that, if your manager's having a conversation around the table with someone else in the ClinOps team, your name is the one that comes up. Oh, Doug. He's great, isn't he, Doug? Because did you see he's produced this new tool that we can utilise here, there and everywhere? I've had, so many individuals I've worked with over the years who just stand out because of that attitude. And those are the individuals, who do I want working on my team? Well, I want Doug. I want Doug because I know he's going to get things done. I know we work well together, and I know he's going to challenge. Yeah. So be that person, be Doug, basically.
Wow.
Or Daphne, or whoever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such awesome advice. And that's similar to what I advise, people that reach out, people that I work with too. And the CTA role, the study coordinator role, I actually call them the primary gateway roles into the CRA world, because they truly are. That's like they give you a strong foundation, like you mentioned, and then that's kind of typically where people get started. And then the third one that I always add is the in-house CRA role. Although that, because it is so similar to the CRA role, it's like it's really hard to get that position without having, like, the CTA or study coordinator first. But sometimes, people look up and they can get into that position, as their first industry role. So it's funny you mentioned those things, because I always, those are my go-to. Um, so awesome. Wow. This is wonderful information. And for you to also give the European perspective as well, because every country is different too. And people sometimes forget that, is that, although it might be the same trial ran by the same sponsor, how it's conducted for each country can kind of vary depending on the individual regulations and rules and, things like that. So I certainly appreciate you, sharing your perspective here today. And it's you have an amazing story of, going from nurse all the way to now you're owning your own thing. It's absolutely amazing. So any last words that you want to leave with everyone here today?
I don't think so. Just be confident, and most of all, enjoy what you're doing, because got a long time in position. So if you're not enjoying it, look at those different opportunities you could take on. If you are enjoying it, then really immerse yourself in it, because it's very fulfilling when you finally get into the clinical operations world.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining me here today and sharing sharing your amazing story with everyone. I truly appreciate you, coming on and you being here with me today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate that as well.